In this video, we are going to create a text generator with the OpenAI model, which is going to create texts on its own, just given a title. So for example here, I've given a title of the Jedi, and it came up with some really funny text like Jabba the Hutt's Jabba had an affair with Princess Leia's second cousin, Jabba Palpatine. He gave her a secret, but she refused to reveal it. In the end, he was forced to kill his way to his former master, and even though he'd got the new apprentice, he never got this wish. So, as you can see, this is completely generated with our model using machine learning, using the OpenAI GPT-2. So we are going to create this entire app here using Flask, and we are going to download the model, train it. In this case, we are going to train it on the Star Wars text here, but you could train it on whatever you would like. And we're going to test it with certain titles. So, if that sounds interesting to you, let's get started. So this is how our development road is going to look like. First, we are going to create the GUI. We are going to create our Flask application, set up our templates, our index.html file that you have just seen, and basically set up the application, how it should work and where it's going to pull its data from. Then we're going to download OpenAI, train the model, we're going to feed it some text, and we're going to configure the code so it fits in our application so that we can actually run it in our browser here. After that, we're going to test it, fix a few bugs and tweak it and see how we could improve it further. So let's get started. Okay, let's get started. I have opened here a blank new project in Visual Studio Code, and now we can start creating our application. So first of all, we are going to create a Flask app that is going to serve our front end that we have just seen. And underneath that, we are going to have a Python script that is actually going to calculate the values or generate the text that we need. So let us start with that. Let us start by creating a new folder, and we are going to call that folder text generator. Since we are going to create a Flask app, we need to give it some type of name in which it's going to live. So in this case, it's going to live under text generator. Now let's create a new file and call it generator.py. Inside of the generator.py, we are going to actually have our classes and have the modules and things that are actually going to generate our data. So first of all, we are going to start with creating our Flask app. So in order for a Flask app to exist, we need to have an init file. In this init file, we are going to initialize our application. Okay, we need to move it inside of that. We are going to initialize our application. We are going to do all the important imports that we need, and our application is going to live from there. Because when we are starting a Flask application, we started by typing in flask run, and so the init file is going to be the initializer of our application. First of all, let us install a few requirements that we need. So now open your Anaconda prompt. I am running here on Windows, so I'm using Anaconda, or open your terminal depending on the environment you're running in. So let us install a few requirements that we're going to need. So pip install Flask, and we are also going to need python.environment. Okay, I have already installed those packages, so it's going to say requirements already satisfied. Now, after you have installed those requirements, you can head to the init.py file and let us import those. So let's import from Flask. Let us import Flask. Now we can define a create app function. It is actually going to create our app. Now we can pass certain settings to the app. So we can pass a config file. So we are going to have a completely separate file that is going to contain our configurations called settings.py. Now we can create our app. So we are going to call Flask pass a few parameters. So name, which represents the name of our file that is actually running. So for example, let's say this is a global variable that we have access to in Python. So let's say that we run python generator.py. The name is going to be generator.py. So this is what we are passing here as a first argument. Now we are also going to pass static URL path. This is important when we are creating a frontend in Flask. We are using a templating engine. And for example, let's say we have some static files like images and videos or something like that that we need to show in our application. We can't just use any path. For example, let's say images is inside of the images folder. We can't just access it like that. We need to specify a static path within Flask. So in this case, I'm going to have a temp folder, and this is where our files will live. So we also need to call a static folder, which is going to be temp. So far so good. Now we can configure our app. So for that, call app config. Config. Now from file. Actually, it's from py file. And now we're going to pass our config file, which is going to contain our config settings here. Now we can register a blueprint. In order to have we are going to create the routes .python file, which is going to contain our routes that we are going to hit. And there we are going to configure our blueprint. So a blueprint is just going to make the entire setup easier, especially when creating larger apps, since it's going to give some level of organization to our entire application. You will see this shortly. Let's call app register blueprint. And our blueprint, we are going to call it generator. So we need to import that. Let us do that. Return app. So we are going to create a new routes.py file. Again, move it to our text generator here. And we are going to import this from routes, import generator. So this is a way how we can refer to our routes file here. And from there, we are going to import our generator. We are going to register the blueprint, and then we are going to return the app that we have configured here. So as a next step, let's go to routes and configure the routes there. We need to import a few modules from Flask. So from Flask, import blueprint that we have just mentioned, render template, request, and redirect. And from our generator, we are going to import our AI. So we are going to create a class here called AI. We're going to instantiate an object from it, and this is what we are going to import here. So we can comment this line out for now, but I'm going to leave it here so we don't forget it later. Now we are going to create our generator blueprint that we have imported inside of init here. So generator is going to be equal blueprint generator. Now we need to pass it a name, and we again need to pass the name of the file here. So if you don't entirely understand the concept of a blueprint, here is the documentation. So Flask uses a concept of blueprints for making application components and supporting common patterns within an application or across applications. So blueprints can greatly simplify how large applications work and provide a central means for Flask extensions to register operations on applications. So basically what this is, it's going to make our life easier because we can use this type of structure to create our routes, to create our templates, and to basically just create a Flask application. So what I mean by that is, for example, we can do the following. Right now, when we want to create a route, we can specify an generator, specify a route, and now we can give it the route that we need. For example, we are going to have slash, which is going to be our index. Now we define the function behind it, which function is going to be executed when we hit this route. And now we are going to return a template. So we could return something like a string and something like blah blah. And when we hit that route, then we are going to see this blah blah string on the page. But we want to return some type of HTML there. So let's use render template, which we have imported here. And inside of render template, we are going to give our HTML file that we want to render. In order for this to work, we need to generate a new folder here called templates. And while we'll edit it, we can also generate a new folder called TMP for our static files that we have specified here. So this blueprint and Flask setup that we have configured here is going to look inside of templates for the files that we are going to return here. So it is important that the folder is named templates and that we have those HTML files inside of that. So we are going to have an HTML, so index.html file here. And the render template is going to search inside of templates and return the correct file that we required. And there is also, since we are using a templating engine here, we can exchange data between our HTML here and our route here. For example, if we pass a query string or if we pass some parameters, we can pass those parameters like this. Parameter is equal to something, some value that we have provided. And then we can access this inside of our HTML file as parameter. And we can do the reverse as well. We can pass data from here, which we can extract inside of our application here, like the following. For example, let's say we have a variable called parameter. We could access it like request. For example, form, let's say we have passed something through a form, and then we could access it like parameter here. So we will see this in a few moments, how to actually do that. But for now, we're going to return our index file here. Now let us create a new route. So I'm going to copy this over here. And now we're going to have an analyze route, which is going to be hit when we actually submit our title. That the title is going to be submitted. Then the AI is going to generate some response and return it back. So this is we also need to define a method here inside of methods. And this is going to be a post request. Now we again define our method, our function here. We can call this however we want, but in order to keep it more consistent, I'm naming it like the extension here. So now it would be the time to actually generate a bit of the HTML so that it's easier to understand what we're actually doing here. So navigate to index.html. In order to make it look a bit nicer, I'm going to use Bootstrap here. So you can navigate to the Bootstrap page and copy this link here to import the CSS files. So you could of course make it much nicer and import JavaScript files or create your own templates or create the styles you would like. But since I don't want to focus too much on the front-end side of things, I'm just going to use Bootstrap and create a simple form here. So what I'm going to do now is actually paste in my template, paste in my HTML here, so we don't lose too much time on that, and explain you how the HTML works actually. So let me paste my HTML in here. So what I have done here is I created two div divs, one for the left and one for the right side. In the right side, I'm just going to have the picture of Wally. And I have created some styles here. For example, this is going to be flex direction row. I've given it a width and a height of 100% and given some background color. Then here, this is the important part. I have created a form. Again, I have provided some stylings here, which you can do as you would like. Then it's important to provide the method as post and then give it an action. So the action is going to redirect us to a certain URL. So it's going to be URL for generator analyze. So it's going to get us to this route here. After we get to that route, you're going to pass in some data. For example, we have an input here. Again, I have specified a type, a style, a class, a placeholder, all not that important, but this is important. I have provided a name and the name is title. So in order to access this inside of here, okay, this should be a column, we are going to be able to access the data in here and work with it. So let us do that. We're going to extract the title like request, form, and now the name is title. So we are going to extract the title. Then we are going to generate some text with our AI. We are going to call some function on our AI. We could call it generate text. So this is not yet created, but I'm just writing how it should look like. And we're going to pass in the title as a parameter here. And after that, we're going to return render template. And again, we are going to return index.html. But we are going to pass in some data. In this one, we are going to pass text as the response that our AI generates. And that text is used here. As you can see, we have those two curly braces. So this means we can write our templating functions inside of that. And we're going to access the text inside of here. So those are basically the two important factors that you need to consider. Everything else is just plain CSS and HTML. So let us save those files. Our routes is finished. We have created a temp file. I just need to put my picture in there of Wally. We have created our templates. Now it is time to actually create our model and train it. Before we can get into creating the model, let us just finish a few little things before we forget about them and have errors later. So let's create our settings.py file. For that, we're going to import OS and we're going to give it an admin. For now, we are probably not going to need this, but let us do that still so you can see how this works. So we're going to access from our OS environ get, and now we are going to create a new file called .env, and we are going to access our .env files in here, our settings.py file. So we are going to have an admin username. We are going to have the same for a password. Let us create a password and have an admin password here. Great. So what we would do now is have those variables actually. Admin username would be an admin password would be password, for example. So I have just shown you how to work with those environment variables so that everything is safe and everything is done in a professional way, but we're probably not going to need this here, but still we can leave it. And move the environment file to our source here and not inside of the text generator. And one more thing we are going to need is for our Flask app, we're going to need Flask environment. This one is definitely necessary. What we are going to provide here is give our Flask app, which is going to be the folder within our Flask app. So this is text generator. And you need to provide that information here. So if this was named differently, this would need to be named adequately. And we also need to pass flask env, which is going to be equal to development. And you also need to pass that variable as well. So far so good. We could actually start creating our model now, which is actually the most interesting part. And one more thing, I have also created a Wally image here, which is a PNG image, and moved it to our temp folder. So we are going to use the OpenAPI GPT-2. So in order to access this, go to the following link, paste in this link. So I'm on github.com and as Shepard GPT-2 and go there. So the difference between this one and our normal GPT-2 repository from OpenAI is that there are some helper libraries here like encode and train and so on, so that are going to help us train our model with some data that we provide to it, and then we're going to adapt the code a little bit in order to be able to run it with our application. So you can just download this. I'm going to download it as a zip here. After it's downloaded, you can extract the files. I'm going to delete this one. Okay, and now we're going to move this to our desired folder. So what I have done here is I have just extracted this to GPT-2, fine-tuning, and I have just pasted in the same source location that our text generator is at. Now in order to work a little bit easier with our application, we're going to do the following. Move the train.py inside of source. Move encode also to source. And this train/horowat.py also move it to the source folder. Now we are going to need to install all the requirements from our text here. So open Anaconda, go to GPT-2 fine-tuning and type in pip install -r requirements.txt. So this is going to install all the requirements, all the packages from our text file. I have already installed the requirements, so that's going to be fine. And one thing that is not included in the requirements, but that is extremely important, is TensorFlow. So you are going to need to install pip install TensorFlow. But it's important to install a specific version of TensorFlow, and that's going to be 1.8. So the package is a little bit outdated, like not too much, but there are a few functions that have changed. So while I was testing it, I either had to change those inside of our train file. So for example, if you go to our train file, there are certain variables that are outdated with TensorFlow, which you could either update yourself, or you could use a certain version of TensorFlow that still supports all of that. So I think it's better to use the certain version of TensorFlow since it's going to reduce a lot of errors that happen throughout of that. So really important to install pip install TensorFlow 1.8. If you have another version, it's going to delete the other version and install 1.8. So you can just hit enter. Requirements already satisfied, so it's not going to change anything with my code here. The next thing is to download our model. So we can again go to actually the download model is inside of our source here and not inside of this source. So just type in Python download model.py. And now we need to specify which model we want to download. So in this case, we want to download the 117 million parameters model. There are, I think, 3 or 4 models. The biggest one is, I think, the 1.6 billion parameters. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the biggest model. But I would recommend to go with the smallest model, since it's going to take a lot of time to process the larger models, and you're going to need better hardware. Since I have a pretty mediocre CPU here, I'm also going to go with the 170 million parameters model, since it's just going to be faster. The results, I have run the larger models in the cloud, and the results are better. You can really notice that the results are better, but the process is completely the same. And if you want to go with the larger models, just download the larger ones and follow exactly what we are doing here. So what we are going to do now is move our model that we have just downloaded here inside of our source folder to keep everything consistent. So the models, then code, model, sample, and train, everything should be inside of our source folder now. And the Docker files are really not important. The git ignore files are also not important. You can ignore those. You could even delete those ones. So what we need to do now is create a new file and call it training.txt. The training.txt file is going to contain all our data that we are going to train our app on. So it's going to, for example, here, we want to focus on the Star Wars universe, and we want to specialize our model according to Star Wars. So I have found something interesting where you could use all the data from, which is this website here, the entire Star Wars story finally explained. So what I have done here is I have just copied all of that, of course, without the images, and just pasted that inside of the training.txt file. So the URL of this is on www.looper.com, entire Star Wars story finally explained. So you could just Google this and find the same article. So when you paste this, it's just going to be like that. A bunch of text, 737 lines of Star Wars text. You could, of course, use anything you would like. This is just the example I went with. So now run the following command: python encode.py. You're going to provide a training.txt file, and we are going to output a training.npz file. So which represents an encoded model which the training script will use. So encode, oh, okay, my bad, we need to move to the source folder because the encoded py file is inside of our source folder. So let's run it again. You should see something like this. This is going just to say that the version that we are using of TensorFlow is outdated, but you can completely ignore that. And you should see something like this, reading and writing files. And after that, you should have an NPZ file, which should have some size. So if it's 0 kilobytes, then something went wrong. And in this case, things that can go wrong is if you have special characters, something like this. It could happen that it can't encode it because it's using UTF-8. And certain characters that just can create problems, but it's going to tell you on exactly which line it happened, so you could just remove it. But with this text, this didn't happen. Now it's actually time to train our model. In order to do that, we're going to run python train.py, and we're going to give it a data set. So the data set is going to be our training.npz file. There are a few things before running this that need to be configured. So in order to do that, let's go to the train.py file. And as you can see, it's going to train for indefinitely until we interrupt it with a keyboard press. And after that, it's going to save our progress. So this is something that from time to time crashes or doesn't save it or doesn't work as it should. So in order to limit that, we are going to, inside of our train.py file on the line 258, 259, we are going to create a new if statement. And we are going to say if our counter is less than a certain max number of iterations, we are going to declare that variable. So what you need to do now is you need to indent all of that like that. So if the counter is smaller, the counter is going to increase. I'm using the counter that already exists in here. And then we are going to have an else statement where we are going to save. So we could also print something like print finished and then call the save on that. And here we are still going to leave that, but we're going to have this if here, because it can happen that this won't work on certain machines, certain versions. It could happen that it crashes. So we just need to declare this variable here, which we could do here probably, or it would be maybe cleaner to declare it somewhere like here. And we're going to provide our max number of iterations to be, for example, 50. The higher the better. What I found out is everything over 120 or so doesn't get you any new gains, but around 50 should be nice. So when we return here, we should be able to run our train.py file. So again, we can ignore those here. Okay, as you can see, it's training now, and it's going to train for the number of iterations that we have specified here. After it's finished, we should see the text finished here, and our model should be saved inside of checkpoints here. So inside of checkpoints run 1, our model should be saved. So I'm going to leave this running, and after it's finished, we're going to continue. So after everything is finished, we can open our checkpoint here. We have run 1, and those are the files that have been created. So you should see a checkpoint, counter, events, model data, and so on. So what we need to do now is the following. Here we have our model. So what we need to do now is copy it and paste it again. So we could just use this one, but since we wanna leave it there, we're going to do it like that. So we have copied the model, and we can rename it into something like trained. So you could name it whatever you would like, but I'm going to call it 170M trained. So, and as you can see, the model contains already those checkpoints and data, indexes, meta files, and so on. So what we need to do now is go again back to source, go to our checkpoint, our run 1, and just take everything that is inside of that and copy it to our new model. So again, go to models and go to trained and paste it inside of that, and replace the files in our destination folder. So don't worry about other files, you could delete them or just leave them in there. It won't really matter. The important thing is that our checkpoint, let's open it inside of our models here. The important thing is that our checkpoint is going to refer to this model 50 here. So as you can see here, our checkpoint refers to, for example, model.checkpoint, and here it refers to model 50.checkpoint. So you could rename this as you would like to, adapt it to some naming conventions you would like, but this is the simplest way to go about this. So after everything has been trained and finished, we can actually start our model and see if it's going to work. So in order to do that, we could use, there are certain files that we can run. One of the best one is the interactive conditional sample.py, which is located in the source folder here. And as you can see, the model name, this is the default model that it's going to use. But when running it, we can provide it a different model and use that one. So let's just run it in our terminal to take a test. So run the following: Python interactive conditional samples.py. We are going to top k set to 40. Now set our model name to the model that we have created. So this is going to be 117M trained, and give it some maximum length that we can produce of, let's say, 150 words. So let's run that. So here is our model prompt. We could type in something like the Jedi and wait for the output. As you see, the output takes a little bit, and the larger the model, the longer it's going to take. The film's central idea would be to be able to infiltrate the Django group via a hidden network of spies in the desert, where the members would work out various secret corporations while secretly plotting and directing their own actions. So yeah, you can see it gives really interesting results. So I'm not really sure if there is something about Django. Okay, yeah, there definitely is something about Django. I'm not an expert in Star Wars, sorry for that. I just watched the movies once. But yeah, as you can see, the responses can be really, really interesting and fun and even useful. So now, since we have pretty much created our model here, we have created our Flask application, it's time to combine those and to display our results inside of our Flask application. So let's do that. If you want to watch the entire video, you can either watch it on this channel, the video is going to be linked at the end of this one, or you can head over to Noveltech Media and watch the entire video over there. So thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video and see you next time.